Hey everybody, welcome back to Endure, the Athlete Story. Today's guest is former professional triathlete from Australia, Greg Bennett. Greg's a legend in the sport of triathlon. He's among some of the top triathletes ever to do the sport and has the results to back it up. Greg has 2 ITU World Series titles. He's won the World Triathlon Championships. He was 4th in the Athens Olympics for triathlon. He has started 82 ITU World Cups, has 23 podiums and 6 wins, and has won the richest ever prize purse in the Lifetime Fitness Grand Slam series. He's got over 100 international wins in triathlon and many more. Greg now lives in Boulder, Colorado with his wife Laura, who was also a top professional triathlete, and their kids. Greg hosts the Greg Bennett Show, Be With Champions, a podcast where he talks to top athletes from around the world. Greg tells us about his story in the sport of triathlon, how he turned pro, how he had to work hard to gain the confidence in himself to become a champion. And we get a lot of value in this episode from Greg, from one of the world's top triathletes ever. And he's just given us loads of advice, loads of tips. And it was great to sit down with Greg and chat to him. And I'm honoured to have him on the show. And I thank him for giving us his time and providing a really good episode for all you to listen to. So we thank Greg for that. As usual, this show was brought to you by EJX2 Coaching. I'm a triathlon coach and endurance coach with a background in sports science. I provide lactate testing for anyone based in the northwest of Ireland. And if anyone has an event coming up, a race coming up, and you want some advice or maybe some coaching, please drop me an email or a message. I'd be happy to get a chat to you and see what we could do. You can email me on ejx2coaching@hotmail.com or just drop us a message on Facebook or Instagram at ejx2coaching. So without further ado, so Greg Bennett, welcome to Endure, the Athlete Story. Thanks for coming on the show. Honored to have you here.
Thanks for the invite, Emmett. I got you on Instagram. You reached out and said, "Would you come on my show?" And I was pretty excited to come on. Any chance to get talk about myself for an hour? Why not?
That's it. So I first came across you. Obviously, your career as an athlete, but your show on your podcast and found you in that. And when I reached out to you, I was thinking, it's an off chance he might not. He's probably busy with his own stuff, and you came straight back. So I really appreciate that and giving me your time, and really looking forward to getting a chat to you. But just tell us, Greg, where are you at in the world at the moment? What's your story at the moment?
Well, at the moment, we just got back to Boulder, Colorado, where home is. Where we spent since 2006, kind of the tail end of my career. Well, probably mid to tail end of my career, we spent in Boulder here. We just got back. We were in Florida for the last 2 and a bit years, where my wife's family's from, and we hadn't planned to be down there long, but as you realize, the world went kind of crazy, and we decided to stay down there and keep renting our house up here in Boulder. And but we've just come back 4 or 5 weeks ago. Back we have a 1-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, and brought them to the mountains. It was dumping snow when we came back, and they'd never seen snow, so it was kind of fun to just get back to the mountains. And and we have a lot of friends up here. It's after 10-15 years here now of being athletes, being in the community, it feels like home, so it's nice to be back.
Yeah. And you're from Australia originally?
Yeah, Australia originally. Grew up in Sydney with a couple of brothers, and sports mad family, all of that. And by the age of sort of 16, 17, 18, had really sort of found my way in triathlon, started to doing reasonably well, and finished my university studies, a number of years after that, and went straight into, being a professional triathlete.
Very good. What part of Australia from you're from Sydney, Greg? Is it?
Yeah, so Sydney, the northern beaches. So if you look at the Sydney Harbour, you have Mossman, overlooking the harbour there. Beautiful part of the world. Actually,
Yeah,
we're hoping we can get back there at some point, but Australia's got pretty strict
yeah.
quarantine regulations and getting in and out. So we're kind of on pause at the moment until we can get back
Mm-hmm.
down under and spend some time down there.
Yeah. Now I know it. Me and my wife, once we got married in 2018, and we
Mm.
went to Australia for a honeymoon. So it was
Ah,
a long honeymoon. We were kind of traveling, but the Australia leg of the travels was in a van. So we bought an old camper, and we know Sydney. We were in Sydney a few times, and
very
all
cool.
around
Well,
them.
do you know a place called Noosa? Did you get up to a little town called Noosa
Yeah,
north of
Noosa,
Brisbane? Yeah, so
Noosa.
that's where my wife and I have spent probably the last 15 to 20 years when we go down there to
Yeah,
train.
yeah,
We would go there, and we may go back there someday. But it's
yeah.
another beautiful part of the world. Yeah.
This is a beautiful part. Surfing, great surfing there as well.
Uh-huh.
So,
Uh-huh.
and I think we were there just a few weeks. When is the Noosa Tries? Like, is it end of
Yeah.
October, November?
Yeah. It's that
Yeah,
October, November.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Maybe
we were
start
there
of
just
November.
2 weeks or 3 weeks before that. I was kind of like, we had to move on, but I was hoping I could have stayed around, but it was
You
about too
missed one of
long. Yeah,
the great events of the world of
yeah, yeah,
endurance. You
yeah.
need to get back there when it comes. The Noosa Triathlon Festival, goes for a week.
Mm-hmm.
They have the bike criteriums, the run races, and the big swim races. All Olympians and world champions,
Yeah.
and then the climax is the triathlon at the end of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just thousands of. It's a big celebration. It's almost like the start of summer for Australians.
Mm-hmm.
It's that celebratory experience where everybody leaves Sydney and Melbourne and the big cities and they go up to Noosa, this little
Yeah,
town, and it's a beautiful part of the world. And
yeah.
it's an amazing event to be a part of.
It's a beautiful place. That whole coast, that's where we spent more or less all of our time. The whole East Coast, just
Yeah, that's
unbelievable.
basically where everything is.
Yeah,
once you
exactly. Yeah,
once you go over the Great Dividing Range, it's kind of nothing till Perth.
yeah.
So
But
yeah,
no, it's a beautiful place. So Greg, just going back, you mentioned there, you grew up with a few brothers. Are you younger or older than your brothers?
I'm the middle. I'm the middle. So I
Okay,
have a brother, older brother, who's 2.5 years older. He actually played professional rugby, so
okay.
he was the real athlete in the family. If you must know, he was incredible footballer. Very very quick. So played either halfback or fly half or whatever, or
Mm-hmm.
on the wing, and wasn't afraid of anything. He had all the guts or no brains, one of the two. But he could take a hit, and I never got his speed, his athleticism, agility, or his sheer strength. And that was a real bummer for me. It was like all I wanted to do was play professional rugby and be in the first 15 rugby in high school. And I was in the 13Es, the 14Es. Don't get me wrong, it went down to the I's and J's, but
Yeah.
E's was still a pretty rubbish level to be playing rugby at. And then I went down to the boat shed to row because the school I went to, rowing and rugby were the two big sports. And my brother was in the first four, and they put me as coxswain, and they said you're too small to row. So I was down the back of the boat and did that for a couple of years, and really didn't enjoy it terribly much. I learnt a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about coaching and people, but it wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was an unusual time for me. High school was, I wouldn't call it difficult, but it wasn't easy because I was a smaller kid in a school where rugby and rowing were the two things, and they were all about being big. And then my younger brother, he played rugby as well. He didn't play professionally, but he was a very good rugby player, and he played as anybody that knows rugby. He played in the front row, which you have the two props either side, and you have a guy in the middle called the hooker.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a prostitute. It's actually a position in the football game, and he was definitely a more solidly built guy as well. So I kind of got this string bean. I mean, string bean for my family in terms of a triathlete. I was always reasonably solid, but
Yeah.
that was kind of my childhood. It was a sports mad family, absolutely sports mad. We enjoyed our academics to an extent, but really the focus of my youth, when I look back, was it was always the Olympics on TV or rugby or whatever was on sport wise. It was on, and the
Yeah.
whole family, mum and dad and the boys, we all just it was one of those, we were playing cricket or backyard cricket all the time, whatever it was. We were outside playing sport my whole youth.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
when your brothers growing up with your brothers, did you find that having the older brother and his athleticism drove you on as a child, even in play or playing cricket, as you say, that it challenged you to be better, just more determined?
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's funny you mentioned that. It's I've been doing that on my podcast. I ask a lot of my guests the same question,
Yeah.
and I've been trying to come up with, is it this second sibling, third sibling type thing? Is there something there? Um, and then just recently, Daniela Riff pointed out, well, hang on, she's basically the eldest. I think she had said she had a sibling that was 10 years younger or something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I said, oh, well, you ruined my data. I've been figuring out everybody I have on the show is, second in line. She said, well, what about Alistair Brownlee? I was like, oh, damn it, you're right. He's
Yeah.
the oldest too, isn't he? And we were like, what about Javier Gomez? I'm like, yeah. And then Jan Frodeno. So it became this, like, I
Yeah.
just told her to be quiet after a while. Like, shut up, Daniela. But I do think there is something in saying all of that. The being the second in line, you are playing catch up
Yeah.
for much of your youth.
Yeah.
And from my experience, my brother was always faster than me, and um, but I did used to take him on in whatever sport there was. And then I realized as I got older, if it went longer, I could actually start to get him on the longer and the longer. So of course that was sort of my cup of tea. Let's extend the run around the block.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fascinating way to look at the world. Is the second sibling more competitive?
Yeah. I think I have an older brother as well, and I don't think we're both into sports and all types of sports when we're younger, but um, neither of us are overly gifted at sports. But I think just for developmental things, like he's 2.5 years older as well, and like when he was learning to ride a bike, I'm at the age where I probably, if I was the eldest, wouldn't be looking to ride a bike, but actually him doing it, and I wanted to do it, and my parents always say
Mm,
things like that, where like I just picked it up quicker or like tried it younger and stuff like that. So I think there's a
yeah.
bit of truth in there. I'm sure there's some scientific research to back it up or whatever, and vice
maybe,
versa.
maybe.
But
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
so then, Greg, tell us how triathlon became a thing for you. At what age are you stringing swim, bike, run together, or even getting into either of
Yeah.
them individually?
Yeah. So it was probably 1986. I was 14. I was running reasonably well at school. I wasn't winning anything. I would represent the school in the 800 or the cross country, depending on the season.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a reasonable runner, but nothing too flashy. But I had a couple of mates of mine that were very close mates. We grew up sailing together and doing a whole bunch of other sports on the harbour, surfing, whatever it was. And they were the ones that said, "Hey, Greg, there's this thing called a triathlon out in little town called Nepean, just west of Sydney, Nepean River," and said, "How about you come and we'll do it as a team. You do the run leg, and my mate Scott did the swim, and my other mate, no, Scott was doing the bike, Tim was doing the swim." And when we got out there, Tim had a bit of an asthma issue, and they said, "Well, Greg, you surf a little bit. Can you do the swim for us?" And I was like, "Oh, crap!" It was like an 800-meter swim, but it might as well have been 10 miles. Do you know what I mean? I'd never done swim squad or anything.
Yeah.
And so, I did the swim, got through, came out of the water second last. It was, I beat some elderly lady out, I think, I didn't quite come last. But anyway, it was, I handed off to my friend Scott. He did the bike, and then I took off on the 14-kilometer run, which I attacked it like it was an 800-meter run and realized pretty quickly that, hey, this is a long way. Anyway, got through it, and there was an atmosphere. There was a feeling. It wasn't just us. It was like this whole community were going to hell and back together.
Mm-hmm.
There was this brotherhood that I hadn't experienced it ever before. And I hadn't done the individual event. I'd just done a team. But it was enough that I still felt the community and what was going on. This was 1986, where the sport was really still in its infancy. It was
Mm-hmm.
just taking off. But it was very quickly, I think that Christmas, I think mum and dad helped me get a road bike, threw on some aero bars that were just coming out, the Scott DH aero bars, some clipless pedals, all sorts of things. And I really just fell in love with the sport. And I think for me, it was a little bit of an identity,
Mm-hmm.
going through those high school years is quite difficult for most. I think we're all trying to find our way and be in the right peer groups. And for me, that became triathlon, became that identity that I needed. I became a triathlete.
Mm-hmm.
I was still a scrawny kid. I started to pick up the swim reasonably quickly. I think I got into swim squad, when I was about that 14, 15. Still young enough, early enough to probably develop a little bit of swim technique, although
Yeah.
I still look pretty awful in the water. But yeah, it was during that time I kind of, yeah, I think the community where I was, the Balmoral Triathlon Club, started up in late 80s. And there were races all up and down the eastern seaboard of Australia. Like you mentioned, everywhere you drove on
Yeah.
your honeymoon, it was every country town had a triathlon. And you'd go away on a weekend with your mates and sleep in the car, or a tent or whatever you had, and get up a race morning and go do these little triathlons.
Mm-hmm.
And it just became everything I wanted to do. And when I finished high school, I went to university, did a course in computer programming. Believe it or not, it was a business degree, and I thought these computers might take off. I might do computers, learn a bit about them. So I did that. But it was during that time, I was doing that degree, and then I went back to Sydney and did another degree more in what do they call it? Human movement is the name of the degree. But basically, I majored in sports marketing, and it was during those years of study that I was, working as a waiter 20 hours a week. I was studying 20, 25 hours a week, and I'd put 15 to 20 hours into my triathlon. And that
Mm-hmm.
was all I was wanting to do. I'd party every now and then, but really that would be once every 6 months kind of thing. It really became my life. And during that time, now I'm talking sort of 1990 to 94, 95, triathlon in Australia started to become a bit more professional. It became more professional on the world scene. The
Mm-hmm.
world championships became official, and there was a real. The sport was very vibrant. It was full of early adopters. We were the first to jump onto disc wheels. We were the first to have the clipless pedals and the aero bars and the sport. Everybody was mad about the Oakley sunglasses that were just wrapped around your face that looked a little crazy and silly, but the sport was colourful. Everything was fluorescent yellows and greens and pinks, and that was all fun. It was very much like that. And by 94 was probably my biggest year in the sense it was the first year I made an Australian team for World Championships in Wellington, New Zealand. It was also the first year that a series in Australia called the Grand Prix started up, and the Grand Prix was live racing on television. Going up against cricket and the big sports that were going on around the world. And it was 5 to 7 events over the summer. And each event had, up to 3 races in it. Little super sprint type things, 20-minute
Mm-hmm.
to half an hour type races, and you do them 3 events. And so we would come out of an Australian summer in those early days, having raced those races, plus a couple of other races up and down the seaboard, plus Australian series races. You'd have 20, 25 races under your belt. And then, by 95, 96, you'd start leaving the Australian summer and go to, Europe or Asia or North America. And boy, did we come out charging, because we were racing all year round. I mean, there was one year I think I raced 45 times, if you include by doing those 20-minute races,
Yeah.
every time. And the beauty of it was we got to race the best every time we raced. Never won a race in the early days. I would say never. I think I was averaging about a 6% win rate. So if you think about it, I was winning 3 out of every 50 races or something. It was very, very few races I was winning, except for club races I was winning. But on the international scene, not a lot. But
Yeah.
I was racing the best in the world. Every time I raced, I was racing Greg Welsh, world champion, Miles Stewart, world champion, Brad Bevan, World Series champion. Every single time I raced. And so I knew what the world level was early.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a very much a baptism of fire to become a professional athlete. Live television, doing interviews, the way you handle yourself. There was no turning professional. It was suddenly just you are.
Yeah.
And that was your new world. And I think that's why there was quite a strong Australian group that came out of that 90s, 80s, 90s era, and even dragged on into the noughties, with guys like Chris McCormack and
Yeah.
Craig Alexander. even people like Simon Whitfield, who learnt his craft in Australia and then went back to
Mm-hmm.
race for Canada. And I'm missing many, many names of just guys that really learnt their trade at that time. So
Yeah.
it was a special time for me. It really, you know, I'm a big believer in that Malcolm Gladwell book, what's it, Outliers. Have you read that book?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's fantastic. So he talks a lot about, we always talk about, oh, this person's talented and
Yeah.
this person's talented and they work hard. But he talks about the third element of that is opportunity.
Yeah.
And and the greats will understand that there's opportunity that separated them from not just working hard and having talent. And for me, my career is just splattered with opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And 94, I'm incredibly thankful for the online sports, the Bray brothers who put on the Grand Prix that went for that next sort of 6 to 10 year window where we were able to hone our craft for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was a long-winded.
That was
I
good.
rabbited on, but I kind of just wanted to take you through a little bit of
Yeah.
that journey of finding
Yeah.
triathlon and then turning professional and what that looked like.
Yeah. I'll go back in a minute, but just on that note of the opportunity, it's an interesting theory because it's refreshing to hear it, especially from someone like yourself who's been so successful. You could easily say, "Oh, it's because of all my hard work, or it's because of all my talent." And I think if I'm right, Alistair Brownlee had said it before as well. Like he's been extremely lucky in his career. He's been
Yeah,
lucky that he had the right running coach at school. He was allowed to run for 1 hour at lunchtime. He got the right opportunity at the right time, and I think that's part of it. I'm sure there's,
100% it is. 100% it is. But there's also looking for opportunity and taking
yeah,
advantage of opportunity when it's there. And
mm-hmm.
for me, I was always looking, always searching, going, where is the opportunity?
Yeah,
Where is it, and make it happen.
mm-hmm.
I'll never forget in 2011. So this is tail end of my career. I'm 39 by this stage, almost 40 actually, and I won the High V triathlon in the US here,
Yeah,
and it was a big money. It was 200 grand or whatever, and some bonuses. And one of the ITU guys that was racing, I remember hearing him say, "Oh, I should have done that." Rather than just chasing the Olympic dream,
yeah,
following the ITU to go to London Olympics, and and I just sort of shrugged my shoulder and said, anybody could have entered. Like, you know what I
mm-hmm.
mean? It
Yeah,
was up for grabs. I mean, you had to qualify, but you could have done a race anywhere in
yeah,
the world to qualify. It wasn't hard to qualify, and
yeah,
and 33rd place made 3 grand. It was a race where if you made it qualified, you were making
yeah,
money.
yeah,
And that stuck with me. Is just going, wow, some of these guys are blinded by one thing, that they're missing opportunity around them, and
yeah,
they're blinded by the Olympics, or they're blinded by Kona Ironman, and you're missing things that are popping up around you.
yeah,
I'm not saying you don't go all in on some of those projects, but don't have regrets that you didn't jump on and maybe win some of the big money races or the one-off things.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's where I was always looking for, well, what's next and what's available.
Mm-hmm. So you're combining the opportunities there, but you have to search for it, and you're putting your hard work and your talent into those opportunities, and that's where things can happen.
Exactly.
Just going back there, Greg, that time when you were working as a waiter, you're at university, or say just after you finished university, was it in your mind that I'm going to be a professional athlete, I'm going to be a triathlete, or as you say, did it just happen?
A
Or
little bit of both. I
yeah,
think I'd been fortunate that during my final years, well, during most of my time at university, I was at uni for 5 years doing those two courses. Um, I'd managed to make a few dollars along the way. I remember in 92, I think it was, 91, 92, I won this thing called the Australian Duathlon Cup. And
mm-hmm.
it was out in Bankstown, west of Sydney, and it was a pretty decent field. And I surprised myself and won it. And it was $1,500 cash. And I remember thinking, wow, that's like 10 weeks work at Sizzler. That was where I was working. I don't know if heard of the chain of restaurants Sizzler, but it's basically a steak restaurant, all you can eat, salad bar and all that. It was a big thing in the 90s. And in Australia, we literally used to have big queues, big lines around the corner for people to come in. Anyway, I remember thinking, wow, that's like 8 to 10 weeks of work at Sizzler. This is awesome. And those little bits, a few little sponsors came in. I remember Saucony was my first paying sponsor, and
Mm-hmm.
they paid me $2,000 for the year to running their shoes. And Bolle sunglasses came on board and gave me free pairs of sunglasses, and I felt like I'd made it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so it had trickled in. I wouldn't. It's not a lot of money. It was, if I said I made 10 grand a year for those couple of years I was at university from the sport,
Mm-hmm.
including all races. And but it was that, like I said, that final year at university, making the Australian team for Wellington World Champs, and I finished 14th, and I think I made $1,000 or something for 14th, and did the Grand Prix earlier that year. And I think I remember walking away from that Grand Prix, finishing sixth in the series, which I was really happy with. And that was a decent amount of money. That was like, okay, this might be a career move. Um, but then in 2005, I no longer had my studies. I stopped working as a waiter, and I was okay. Now I'm going all in. I'm going to be a professional triathlete. And I had serious injuries. I overdid it and didn't really make anything for '05, and it was down. I was
Mm-hmm.
down to my last pennies. Going, what am I going to do? Should I go back and do my dip ed? Become a PE teacher or
Yeah.
whatever. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then it was really just started to get healthy again, and started racing and started getting that positive feedback a little bit again. And by '96, things started turning around in a much bigger way. And by '97, I was sort of winning World Cups, and
Yeah.
and so yeah, I think there had to be, as I've said it on my show a lot, that I believe it starts with passion, you know, and I was incredibly passionate.
Mm-hmm.
I had a real desire to do something special in sport, and I believe triathlon was the right sport for me. Um, and I was incredibly dedicated to trying to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
From a very early age, I grew up in a very disciplined family, a very disciplined when it comes to work ethic and setting goals, and going up and going all in.
Yeah.
So there's that, finding the opportunity and then pulling the trigger and going all in. And so for me, yeah, that got me through sort of some of those darker patches that happened all the way through my career. But I
Yeah.
remember '95 clearly, because that was the year it was like, oh crap, I might be in trouble.
So tell us then, Greg, like you go into that, it was 96, 97, you say, was 97 your first World Cup one?
First
And then,
World Cup win
yeah,
was '97 in Monaco,
yeah.
Monte Carlo, and I never forget sitting at the Australian Institute of Sport with one of my good friends, Trent Chapman, and Chapo. He got to about top 15 in the world there for a while, and probably one of the top 5 or 6 Australians. But
Mm-hmm.
Australia had real depth at that time, so some of these incredible athletes we didn't get to see much. But anyway,
Yeah.
Chapo was a my number one training partner for many, many years there. And we were sitting at the Institute of Sport in Australia in start of '97, and have this massive big screen TV on the wall, huge. And we would just jokingly said, if one of us ever wins a World Cup, you have to buy a big screen TV. And it just seemed so foreign, or so not possible, that we just laughed about it and we laughed it off. And then Monte Carlo, I just turned up. I was very fit, and got out of the water in the lead with sort of Ben Sanson and Jerome, the French swimmers of the day that were just, and I had surprised myself. So I was running up the stairs, and I thought, well, I just got to go for it. And on the bike, and the bike was the Formula One course, just absolutely, incredible bike course. And I opened up a gap and got to a 50-second lead, and then at one point on the side of the road, I saw Chapo sitting there, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, just race. And he yelled out big screen TV or something. And I managed to hold on for the win. Chris McCormack and a guy by the name of Dimitri Gag were chasing me down, and I held them off and won by about 15 seconds. But it was just so surreal. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I was 25 at the time. Chris McCormack said it on my show. He said, Greg, I always suffered from imposter syndrome. And this imposter syndrome is exactly what I felt at that moment, where I wasn't the kid that should be getting to win
Yeah.
a World Cup, and then sit down and have lunch with Prince Andrew and Sergei Bubka, who was the famous world champion pole vaulter, and have all these huge trophies. And I was always used to looking at somebody else. That's usually what Greg Welsh or
Yeah.
Miles Stewart or anybody else has but me. And so that was my real, like, wow, maybe I'm okay at this. I was training incredibly hard.
Yeah.
Talent had matched, some of that, and it was a great experience. I'll never forget.
Yeah. Because although that was surreal in your first one, but you went on. Then I'm just going to mention some of your successes that you went on. The You started 82 of those World Cups, and you had 23 podiums, six ones. Is that correct?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
two World Series titles, a World Championship, and fourth in the Athens Olympics. So this is just
Yeah.
like a ridiculously long list
No.
of achievements. Did it become more natural then that you expected they won once you got into that run of it? Then as your career went on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot better resumes out there than mine, especially in the ITU. I wouldn't. I'm happy with mine. I'm not saying
Yeah,
that. I'm
it's
just saying that
it's a
there's
big list.
for me. I think I really found myself even after ITU a lot more when I focused more on the non-drafting in North America. But I think there were some great experiences in all of that, and my confidence did grow over time.
Hmm.
But I've discussed it on my own show that confidence was always my kryptonite. It was something that if I could go back and slap myself in the face when I'm 17, I'd be like, just have more confidence,
Hmm.
and I think as I got older, I realized I'd say to myself, look, everybody's nervous. Everybody doesn't believe in themselves. Everybody's struggling with this. Why don't you be the one that just believes? And it took a lot of work for me to own that mentality. It didn't come naturally. I always felt like I was this little kid, trying to prove himself, but,
Hmm.
and had a big enough chip on his shoulder to keep trying it. But I never was the one that could take a race by the collar and just, go for it. That came probably once I was sort of 31, 32, 33.
Hmm.
And even with Athens Olympics, I had the devastation of 2000 missing out on that Olympic team. And that was really heartbreaking for me. I was number 2 in the world at the time and had won on the Sydney World Cup the year before. But just the way the Australian selection trials and the way they picked the team, I wasn't left on it. And look, I've
Hmm.
come to terms with that because I think there's more I could have done for myself.
Hmm.
But then I remember saying, well, I never want to be left off a team again by selectors, so I got to make it happen. So that's where, in 2002 and 3, won the World Series, won some more World Cups. And when I wasn't winning, I was on the podium a fair bit. And made the Australian team through jumping through some more hoops again in the sort of domestic season in Australia. And qualified, that was wonderful. But it was really... I injured myself after those qualifications and then went to Athens with a terrible mindset. And that was like, don't
Hmm.
embarrass yourself. I remember saying, just don't embarrass yourself. And I came up short by 8 seconds from the medal. I have zero regrets. I performed very well physically in terms of what I had after dealing with an injury, the whole
Hmm.
way in. But I also look back and go, wow, how much of that injury and that lack of confidence and just that poor mental state, you know, how much did I underperform when it mattered? Um,
Hmm.
and so for me, Athens was a great experience. I had a tremendous team. We had just good fun. And I always wanted to go to the Olympics and experience everything. I wanted the opening ceremony, the village, the everything. And I did that. And that was a really good, fun team. And, long story short, my wife also went to the Olympics in '08 and she's 12 as well, but we both have fourth place medals anyway. So it
All
keeps the
right.
peace in the family.
Very good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at that time, you mentioned there, like when you were like 31, 32, you got that confidence to believe in yourself for winning races. Do you think that shift was completely like psychological and maybe where your interest now lies in the psychology of sport? Or did you change your training anyway? Or tell us a bit about that.
I think a bit of all of that. I think
Mm-hmm.
uh, between 2000, I had several coaches in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Bookberger was my first coach, overall coach, and then I had some great individual coaches, for swim, bike, and run.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve was great because we just kept it fun and he kept the passion alive, and I was never overtrained and it was good fun. Then I had Brett Sutton, who's probably the world's greatest ever
Mm-hmm.
triathlon coach. I had him for 4 years, learned an incredible about myself in terms of physical fitness and what I could do and go beyond what I'd done before. But I lost my passion by 2000. and then getting left off the Australian team was kind of added, a bit of salt to the wound. But
Mm-hmm.
so then I moved to Canada and helped Simon Whitfield get ready for the Olympic Games in 2000, of which he ended up winning.
Yeah.
And then from 2000 to 2003, I had a guy by the name of Lance Watson as my coach slash consultant. And but it was really that 04 onwards that my wife Laura and I, also a professional athlete, as I told you, decided to coach ourselves. And both from the experience, and then I just started reading and reading and reading best ways to coach. And I read a lot of old school books, 50s, 60s, 70s. How did they train? And yes, there was a lot of science and data coming out, in 2004, 2005, but I was fascinated by a man by the name of Arthur Lydiard. And Arthur Lydiard was a New Zealand coach who, coached Peter Snell to the Olympic gold medal in the 800, but then he worked with the Finnish athletes and the Japanese athletes. And he was just, his coaching philosophy really resonated with me. And so when we designed a training program, it became heavily focused on the ability to not tire. So rather than focusing on speed and power, we started focusing on strength and endurance and conditioning, overall conditioning. And so the number one workout for us became a 2-hour run on a Tuesday. And that 2-hour run wasn't done slow. It was done what we called it best easy. And that best easy run really was, it'd start at the start of the year. It might only be, 16 kilometers, 10 miles, and done fairly slow, maybe 5-minute K pace, 8-minute miles. And then slowly you'd increase the distance and the pace would increase over time. By week 12 of every year for probably the next 10 years, once we started doing it from 04, 05, by week 12, that run was up to 32 kilometers or 20 miles, depending on your language, and running at 3:45K pace to 6-minute miles. And then I would do it every single week throughout the entire year, and except if I was racing back-to-back weekends. But even if I raced on a Sunday and I didn't have another race for a while, I'd still get that long run done on the Thursday. So I just pushed back 2 days.
Yeah.
The point with that, and swim and bike were bike was just heavily focused on big gear, on the wind trainer, get strong, and then time trial up mountains, and straight up just in the aero bar, straight up mountains. And then the swim was heavily focused on strength swimming. So we did a lot where we would tie a towel around our ankles and put a pull buoy between our legs, and we do just miles and miles and miles of swimming, just towing these towels around. So you can kind of see the running became very much about the heart and lungs, and if we're developing strength, the bike was all about strength, and the swim was all about strength. And that's it became a good little combination. So physically, I started to become. I knew I could go to an Olympic distance race and sprint the 10K. I knew I'd done the work that I could have the confidence to get off the bike in T2 and run as fast as I could. And my whole theory was, if I can run 1 kilometer in 2 minutes 40 or whatever, then there's no reason there should be a 35 second drop off per kilometer for 10. The math doesn't add up. It has to be better. I just was convinced you shouldn't have to tire that much. And so that was where, I started running those low 29 minutes and then off the bike, off a time trial bike, I'd hold, low 30 minutes or whatever. And don't get me wrong, I was okay. And then kids like Javier Gomez and Alistair Brownlee took that even further, right? But at the time, I was the one that was started to progress how fast you could go, how fast you could run off a 10K, off a hard 40K bike. So there was that physical component, which was massive. And that then did affect my confidence. Like I said, there was this belief that I wouldn't tire. But then I also started really practicing visualizing all the time. Whether I'm lying on a massage table, I was visualizing the events and going through step by step by step. And it became really managed visualizing. It wasn't just daydreaming. It was, I would do workouts where, if a fartlek workout running where I do 10 by 3 minutes and with 1 minute recovery. And before I'd start that run, often driving to the trail where I was going to run or whatever, I would go, well, what's today's scenario going to be? What's the story going to be? Yeah. And I have the commentator in my head and helicopters above and fans and what surprised me, what's the event, what am I visualizing, Minneapolis or Chicago or New York. And I'd visualize who are the key players, what's the temperature going to be. And then I'd start my watch and start my first 3 minutes and off I'd go.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be visualizing doing the actual effort because that was
Yeah.
really, but I'd create okay, there's Greg Bennett and there's, Simon Whitfield, Chris McCormack or whoever it is. They've all come off the bike together and it's, and then I'd create a scenario where I'd run that 3 minutes or 1K or whatever it was. And then at the end of that, I'd have a little rest and I'd re-trigger and go, okay, Greg Bennett's got a 10-meter lead over Simon Whitfield, Chris McCormack. And so I'd go into the next 3 minutes having to hold that or extend that,
Yeah.
that lead or whatever it was. And so I just became very good at playing
Yeah.
and really pushing myself on the trails. So that visualizing became a weapon. Word affirmations became critical. When I'd visualize the night before a race or days before, I knew at what point of the race I'd be saying what to myself.
Yeah.
So it became very definite.
Yeah.
The
That's
gun goes off. The first word that yells in my head is explode. I can still hear myself screaming it in my head, explode. And
yeah.
that explosive was, don't take a breath for the first 12 strokes. Dive, go, 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 go.
Yeah.
That kind of a mentality.
Yeah.
So there was a combination of both.
Yeah.
And if I add one more thing to physical, mental, it would be the emotional side where I was in a stable place with a happy wife and a happy life and things were in a good place. And that's critical for the
Yeah.
other two to work.
Yeah. It's really
So
interesting.
long answer to you,
Yeah.
long answer, but that's kind of that transition from lack of confidence to becoming somebody that was winning 6 to 8% of the time to winning, closer to 1 in 2
Yeah.
For that next sort of 6 to 8 year period.
Yeah. It's really interesting that and how you done that, because what I found, I must try this myself, but when you done that session, you're getting so much benefit from the session there and then, because you're like firing yourself up for it, really motivated of the whole scenario. Plus, when you go to that actual scenario in the race, it's more naturally you've done it before, you've done it in the trail all those times, so it's a kind of one
Yeah.
situation. You're getting the more out of the session, and you're getting adapted to, you're not sort of panicking in the moment of what when it might happen in a race. So it's really interesting, as you
Well,
say.
that's it. I
It
mean,
was
there's even the practicing it within the session, but the static visualizing, I call it, when you're just lying in bed or lying on a massage table. And when I had Dr. Tommy Wood on one of my episodes, and we were talking about this, and I said, well, can you affect yourself physically, by visualizing? Just
mm-hmm,
if you're not actually moving, and the science is now coming out more and more and more that what you can do to yourself physically. What his quote was, what you think directly impacts your physiology.
mm-hmm,
And when you think about it, if you're lying on a massage table or you're just lying in bed relaxing, if you can just quieten the mind and start visualizing of things that you want to have happen.
mm-hmm,
You might want to be the greatest podcaster in the world. And so you start just visualizing, what does that look like?
mm-hmm,
Or you want to be the greatest dad in the world. Well, what does that look like? Spend a moment to think about it. And you can actually physically change yourself by just
mm-hmm,
thinking about it. There's
mm-hmm.
some incredible stories, and these are some of the doctors I want to bring on my show to dive even deeper into this, is the power of the mind on how it
Yeah.
can affect you. Because you think about it, you affect your hormones, you're affecting yourself physically.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's an area that I'm fascinated by and I truly believe in, because I felt it myself,
Yeah. That's
throughout my career.
it's extremely interesting. I think definitely the power of the mind is unbelievable when you see it in some athletes,
Mm.
like how they can
Mm-hmm.
just switch the mind. They do amazing things. It's unbelievable. So it plays a big
Yeah.
part. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, some of
Um,
the athletes, some of the great athletes that really know how to do it, I mean, that you can see that there's a switch that goes on where they just have that extra ability to go to a place,
mm-hmm,
where nobody else can. And I think you and I are similar in that. That's one of the reasons we have these shows, is we're trying to understand how great people do what they do,
mm-hmm,
right? And
mm-hmm,
can we figure it out? And through our own experiences and sharing stories with them, is there some commonality that, you know, how do we optimize ourselves, and how can we do that through just mental preparation? I
Mm-hmm.
think it's fascinating.
It's sometimes people are just about mad. Some athletes are just
Yes.
mad.
Look, I think some are so good because they don't think.
Yeah,
There's that direct opposite. The ones that have the ability to not think at all. That's also a gift. So
yeah.
yeah,
At a
that's funny. That's
at a
true.
training mate, and just you saying like visualization, I'd be like organized for a race and well prepared and think about such and such will be here and I'll be here, and this friend like shows up the transition 5 minutes before race starts. I just have my breakfast, and then on the bike, in my visualization, he wasn't there, and then he comes past on the bike, like just looking around and flying past. Like, you're not even realizing how hard this is. You don't even understand how much pressure you're under. That's which is why you're so good. So I think some
Yeah,
people
that's great.
that don't think are able to just push
That's
themselves
true.
further. So
Yeah, well, I remember Brett Sutton always used to say to all these athletes, don't think, stop thinking.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I get it. Maybe there's a time in your career or whatever that's a good time just to think and stop thinking and just do the work. But I found as I got older, I became better through thinking and owning and taking responsibility. So,
yeah.
but each to their own. I mean, that's also, I think, the more science proves what works and what doesn't work. Um, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's all fascinating.
Yeah. And in your training, Greg, did you use much science, as in like heart rate, power meters? What sort of things were you tracking, or was it more off field?
Power meters for sure on the bike. I would often, though, and this will sound weird, but I'd often have it on for maybe a year and then off for a year. Um, Mainly because I'm a fairly anxious person as it is. And if I wasn't getting my numbers, it really pissed me off.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like being so accountable day in, day out. And so I often would have a year where I'd be heavily focused on, but I found it exhausting for doing it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And used to be a strong believer in um, recognizing yourself and what you're feeling,
Yeah.
and so it was a useful tool to sort of go, okay, I'm writing 350 watts or whatever, and that's what I need to hold. But then after a while, I knew that that's probably what I was holding anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and so towards the end of my career, it became a lot more about, I want those wattages to go down. So let's work on aerodynamics. And, I think I was the first one ever to, really lift my hands up and aero helmets and just get as,
Mm-hmm.
trying to save wattages wherever I could. And I had a really good team around me of people that were helping me with that because I'm not that inclined. I'm not an engineer by any means. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, but I used my Garmin, to measure my runs, and and I'd use heart rate to some degree, more so really at the tail end when I tried, a few longer course races. I think heart rate and understanding pacing and not overdoing things was critical.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, and anybody listening to your show is, when I said do a 2 hour run best easy, please keep in mind the fact that I was getting ready for an Olympic distance race where I
Yeah.
wasn't talking about fat metabolizing, and I was talking about building an engine,
Mm-hmm.
and so you do a long run and you're getting ready for Ironman. There's a reason why you need to run within a certain
Yeah.
framework so your body can metabolize fat, and you're training a different system. So yeah, I used a little bit of data, but I would never say I was a very sciencey type trainer. Not like the Norwegians now, like a
Yeah.
Gustav Eden and Christian Blumenfeld and Casper Stornes and their amazing coach, Arild Svetten,
Mm-hmm.
he was on my show, and just absolutely what they're doing and how they're utilizing science, it's
Yeah.
incredible. And
Yeah.
I think I think the results are showing what they're able to do by just, I mean, monitoring. They were saying they do a VO2 max test every sort of 4 to 6 weeks for both swim, bike, and run.
Yeah.
All three of them.
Yeah.
So they're constantly getting measured. They're constantly testing their temperature. And there's more and more accurate science coming out.
Mm-hmm.
For a
Yeah.
lot of my career, we had power meters that had a pretty broad range of,
Yeah.
and so when they're that broad, you kind of go, well, I thought I had a good session. Oh, but it's telling me I had a rubbish session. But
Yeah.
really, it was the sensor, not you. And so I think you always took it with a grain of salt,
Yeah.
when
I
I was
think
training. But
you have to be comfortable with the metrics you're getting fed back to you, because if it, as you say, if the power numbers make you anxious, or if you're not going to obey the heart rate anyway, then there's no point. Because even with some athletes I coach, like, yeah, some people really like the data, they really like every number that comes back, and then there's other people like they just don't want to wear a heart rate monitor. It doesn't matter to them. They
well,
know themselves. So it's just
personality, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's a personality. I was talking to a guy on my show, Matt Dixon, who has
mm-hmm,
his own podcast
yeah,
too. And we were talking about this exact thing, that if you have an engineer type mindset, if you're a numbers type person, heavily numbers person,
yeah,
like I think we're all numbers people if we're in endurance sport. I think there's
yeah,
always this
yeah,
calculating thing going on in our head the whole time. But there's some of those people can have data all the time. They can wear their Whoop or their Aura ring for sleep data. They can then
mm-hmm,
get up and, I'm wearing now, I got a, I don't know if you can see this. It's like
yeah, yeah.
it's called,
I
Super Sapiens.
wore one myself there for a couple of weeks. Yeah,
Oh, you did?
yeah,
Okay. Well,
yeah,
then there you go. I've only just put mine on today. But my point, I'm not the kind of person that would normally need to
yeah,
know what my glucose levels are and stuff. But I was like, I'm I'll do it for a bit of a science experiment.
yeah,
Um, but would I do this when I was training as an Olympic distance athlete? Probably not. But as I went longer, when they say there's swim, bike, run are the three disciplines, the fourth one is nutrition.
yeah.
Well, then I think you're mad not to have some
Mm-hmm,
kind of, whether it be Super Sapiens or whatever, to monitor your glucose levels to
mm-hmm.
understand how your body works. What were your results like? What did you find out about it yourself? Anything? Or
If you were anything like me, on your first day, I was just like eating something and checking straight away. It's like,
what do you
eat.
mean?
What
What
does
is?
this do? I'll eat a banana, and then I'll eat a chocolate bar, and then I'll see what
Yeah.
happens. But I think for me it was um, it just kind of confirmed. I'd be like conscious of like recovering after training and eating the right food and stuff like that. So it just kind of confirmed that like I was fueled and stuff. But I think where what really mattered was like in sessions and done some race specific session stuff to see just what happened exactly. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just interesting to see like when you were like adequately fueled, how much it just spiked up when you done like a hard effort. If you try it with like a hard effort on, I didn't realize like how high it would go. And then seeing whatever fuel you used before that session, does it rocket down or does it level off and stay good? So
Interesting.
it shows you like as the fuel. But I think it comes back to the basic things, like if you're having your the things that fuel you, the carbohydrate, the adequate amount. But I suppose for different people, they'll have different diets, and
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see. But I was definitely like checking every 2 seconds on the
I think it's
first
going to
day.
be a really great tool for anybody doing endurance events, especially over that 2 hour mark, and probably for under as well. The
Mm-hmm.
only reason I say the 2 hour mark is kind of, we all have in our bodies that sort of
Yeah.
2 hours of glycogen storage, and it
Mm-hmm.
is what it is.
Yeah.
But for the refueling, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what
Yeah.
comes out of it
Well,
going forward.
I was talking to Ronan McLaughlin, who was on the show. He's the current Everest and world record, so he's got
Oh
the
yes, yeah,
record for climbing the meters of Everest on a bike.
yeah,
And he wore the Super Sapiens during his event, and he was saying
yeah.
like because of that he was able to like keep it just perfect. He just kept it. He just had a
Wow,
constant intake of the right amount of carbohydrate needed, and it literally didn't dip until he says he finished, and then it like dipped massively, and he was kind of a bit sick then, and he had to take more on. But he said it just really helped him fuel perfectly for
fascinating.
that 6 hours, and I can't remember the exact time, but 6 hours 40 something minutes.
That's
So
pretty. Well, I was talking to the founder, Phil Sutherland, the other day of
yeah,
Super Sapiens, and I said to him, look, I did a couple of Ironmans, when I turned 40, just to tick a box basically,
mm-hmm.
and just had a nightmarish time with my ups and downs. I feel
Yeah,
fantastic, and then, oh god, I feel
yeah,
rubbish. It was just
yeah,
all over the place, and just nutrition was just rubbish. It was way too much sugar spikes, and all the drinks that we had,
yeah,
and how having something like this could really help everybody with the fourth leg, which
yeah,
that nutrition. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm looking forward to. I mean, I'm a bit of a layman these days. I train sort of 30 minutes to an hour a day, and just want to see sort of what happens.
Yeah. I don't
So
I,
yeah.
I don't know if you'll notice, I did anyway. I have a 1.5-year-old son, and
Ah,
anytime at night, so at night mine was always pretty good, just like around 80, just level. But anytime like he cried or like we had to get up in the night, to like get the baby, I seen my glucose go up. So that was interesting. Might be
wow.
worth chatting to like somebody about it, but like it must be that like fight or flight, maybe know that
Yeah,
kind of.
protective
I'm,
instinct kicks
I'm
in,
sure you
mate.
know yourself, like in the middle of the
Yeah.
night, you jump up and half sleeping, what's going on?
Yeah,
But
well, I
I
got a
seen
one
if
and a half year old boy at home as well. So, well,
you
here, I get it.
you might see some spikes in the middle of the night from that. So it was just
We
interesting.
just close. I'm a bad parent. I just close the door, and I wouldn't even know if he's awake. Isn't that terrible?
um,
uh,
I don't want to take up too much more of your time, Greg, but just on that note about your training, what's training look like for a former world champion, former Olympian these days when you're retired, have a few kids and
Yeah, that was a hard transition actually.
yeah.
Just it was funny. I remember stopping and going, "All right, I never have to train again." And it was probably 3 or 4 months later. I was in a fitting room, which the mirrors are never very nice in a fitting room. But I was trying. Oh, geez, I better start working out a bit. And then I started kind of swimming, biking, and running again. Well, what am I doing? I needed more time away. I needed to
Mm-hmm.
kind of go to rubbish and then rebuild. And one of the things I've kind of enjoyed is almost, and this was probably not the healthiest thing to do, but I kind of get a bit unfit and I enjoy the progress of getting fit again.
Yeah.
But then once fit, I'm kind of like, well, what am I going to do with it? I'm
Yeah.
not going to be a world champion athlete ever again. So I get fit, and then I kind of go, eh. And during that sort of whole period of the last 5 6 years since I retired, I I hit the gym really. I still have that athlete mentality, so I
Mm-hmm.
overdo it whatever I do. But I go to the gym, and then I realize, wow, I've put on 25 30 pounds. I'd like to say it was all muscle, but probably a bit of fat there. But it was basically about you know 12 to 15 kilograms of muscle. I
Mm-hmm.
became very very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to go for runs and just felt rubbish running. And I'm like, actually, running's one of the things I kind of really, the pleasure of running when you're fit, it just
Yeah.
feels beautiful. So I stopped doing the gym again and back running. And now I'm back in Boulder on the trails up here running, just is fantastic. And I've got Zwift. Zwift have been kind enough to come and set up my home. So I'll be starting on Zwift this weekend on the bike,
Very good.
because otherwise I've been just doing half an hour bikes every now and then just to, make sure I remember how
Yeah.
to do it. Um, but I turned 50 in 6 months' time, and I potentially might put a goal on the calendar for next year that might challenge me a little bit. I don't want time away from the kids. Right
Yeah.
now I've got the podcast, I've got my family. They're kind of the two priorities right now, and
Mm-hmm.
my overall health is just let's just not overeat and self-indulge too much, and just try and stay somewhat healthy
Yeah.
rather than trying to be as fit as I can. But that's been a growing process to get
Yeah.
used to being training for health and not performance.
Yeah. And when you have that many years of performance behind you, although you say you dip and get on fit, but what is on fit for a former champion? Like when you run, or you what's your run pace, or if you today now, if you could do a 5K, what do you think you could do?
In all honesty, I'm not wearing watches at all,
Yeah.
so I just
Yeah.
go and run. And I've just put headphones in for the first time in 2 years, started listening to some music. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I've been back running in Boulder here consistently, sort of 5 to 6 times a week on the trails around here, around about between 5 and 10K a run, and just always run the uphills hard. And
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of long uphills here. And I remember when Jan Frodeno and I were training together back in 2010, and I was trying to get fitness back because I'd been sick. Or was it 2011? Yeah, I'd been sick. And I remember him saying, Greg, if you want to get fit quick, run hills. And, we're doing 2K hill repeats and stuff like that. And so that's what I'm doing now. And it's only been these last few weeks that I think I'm starting to run. I think if I was to run a hard 5K, maybe I'd go 17:30 or something like that. But it wouldn't be, no,
Yeah.
it's nothing like before.
Yeah.
And I'm quite okay with that. It's,
Yeah.
I don't run for titles, or and in my head I do. In my head I'm always visualizing still. I've always got Christian Blumenfeld or Alistair Brownlee or Gomez or Frodeno or whoever. I can't. I seem to every time I run, I seem to have somebody chasing me or I'm chasing somebody, but I'm not going very quick like I used to. I mean,
Yeah.
not that I was ever super fast either, but
Oh.
yeah, no, it's train. I have noticed that training for health is harder than training for performance. You know, just
Yeah.
training to just maintain some fitness,
Yeah.
and that's where having a goal, having something that scares you is
Hmm.
does make training easier.
And would it excite you at all to go back and do like a local triathlon or like a half decent triathlon like it somewhere?
I do think about it from time to time. I think the problem is, yeah, I think enough time has almost passed that I probably could because there
Hmm.
is zero comparison
Hmm.
now. Whereas if I'd done it 2 or 3 years ago, that you'd still be going, oh, maybe I could get back to almost there. Now I know that I haven't swum properly in I mean I'll swim every now, but nothing much. The bike, like I said, if I do half an hour 2 times a week at the moment, that's
Yeah.
it on the indoor trainer, and then really it's kind of I think I raced. I think I counted over 500 races. I raced a lot, and there's not many experiences that I need,
Hmm.
but I do love the community and I do love being around everybody else. So yes, I think I'll probably end up doing something like a Hawaii 70.3 or a nice vacation race I
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
get my
Yeah.
head around and do it with a few mates for sure.
Yeah.
And almost go back to how I started the sport, do it
Yeah.
with mates and
Just
just be around the
fun. Yeah.
community and the environment. And it's not about trying to win the age group. And I don't want to be that professional athlete that comes back and wins the age group. I
Yeah.
kind of go, I've had my turn,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful for my turn. And now I just love the community and, so yeah, I probably will pick an event for next year. I just don't know which one yet. It'll
Yeah.
have palm trees in it for sure. It won't be cold, but
Good stuff. And are you looking
yeah.
forward to
What do you got coming up?
well, this for us, we're still pretty strict COVID. I think
Oh,
there's not a lot of races on the calendar. A lot have got cancelled this year in
I'm
Ireland.
sorry
So
to hear that.
although there's one next weekend, 6th of June. First it'll be
Oh, brilliant.
my first race. It's just a sprint triathlon.
Yeah,
First
yeah.
one in I don't know, first proper organized one in 2 years. So looking forward to it.
Uh,
And
I'm
then
excited for you. That's great.
it could be the last for a while now. We've got another baby on the way, please God, and start of July. So
Oh, congrats.
get on, get one race
Oh,
done, and
geez,
then
yeah.
back
Any
to
free time you had is gone.
that's it. One
Any free time
one
you had is done.
I'm just getting used to one now. Two's gonna be good fun. But um we'll just finish up, Greg, real quick with some quick fire questions if you're happy enough with that.
Yeah,
A few quick
yeah.
questions
Go
just
ahead.
so your favorite session when you were training professionally, favorite session to do.
Short fartlek run, 20 by 1 minute fast, 1 minute easy. Um, I do that 3 to 4 times a year, about 10 days out before a peak race. Yeah,
Good stuff.
running. Yeah.
Hardest you've ever pushed your body in a race or training? Is there one time you can remember?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know that there's one that stands out. I think
Every race.
somebody like, yeah, well, I think it's the word hard. I loved that. I still do. I don't enjoy the long slow stuff. I enjoy the critical point at where the body is about to pass out.
Yeah.
And there's a suffering. Yeah. So you know, no, I don't think there's one. I really can't pick one. I'm gonna have to say pass because I feel like
Okay.
that's nearly every workout and every race.
Favorite training destination?
uh, Geez, can I have three? I'd
Have
say
three.
Victoria, Canada for the running. I just love living in Vic for the running. And then Noosa, Australia for the swimming, the open water swimming in the pool. And then the biking, I'd say Boulder or maybe Switzerland. But I enjoy the mountains for biking. Yeah.
Good stuff. Toughest competitor you've ever come up against?
Oh, toughest. That's a hard one because some guys were just simply better. I think that nearly anybody that pushed me to the line, whether they beat me or I beat them. I, yeah, I'm gonna have anybody in the top 10 greatest of all time. I just anybody from you know Simon Lessing, you know Simon Whitfield on his day, Chris McCormack, any of these guys that had their days were going to be tough.
Yeah.
So but if you had their measure, you were the tough one.
Yeah.
There are some guys like a Jan Rahula who came third at the Sydney Olympics, was just a mongrel. He wouldn't let go. He raced above himself. But yeah, there's too many to mention. Pass.
Favorite meal, an easier one. Favorite food.
Favorite food. You know what? I'm pretty happy with a good burger and beers, or even without the burger, just the beers and a meat platter or
Yeah.
they call it charcuterie, I guess, but whatever. I just said to my wife, with Father's Day coming up here in the US, I was like, you know what, just give me a charcuterie platter and a beer on the deck, and I'm happy.
Your thoughts on the latest shoe technology? Carbon plates, air pockets.
It's insane. I tried them just to see what they were like, and they just haul you down the track. I mean, it's unbelievable. I went and got myself just some Nike Pegasus. They don't have the carbon plate, but they got the nice cushioning,
Mm-hmm.
and it's definitely made my running far more pleasurable.
Yeah.
Really, really has. And I think it's a bit like when we had those speed suits in swimming, and we saw the records plummet. And I think, we're seeing all the records plummet every week. And I see somebody breaking the 5K record, whether it's in the Adidas, Asics, or the Nike, or less in the Hoka. I don't know. But it's the foam compound as much as the carbon plate.
Yeah.
I think there's whatever they've done. I know it's incredible. Almost makes me want to make a comeback. No, not quite.
Male and female. Who's going to win the Olympics this year? Who's your top pick, male and female?
That's a hard one. You know what? Because I think it would be just awesome. I think Nicola Spirig.
Mm-hmm.
She's already got a gold and silver, but I just think maybe with the overall fitness of the heat, if it came together, she needs it to come together.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I think another. Yeah, but I'll put Nicola there for the moment, she's a long time friend anyway.
Yeah.
And then for the men, wow. I think the trajectory of Joel Filial's group with Vincent Lewis and Mario Mola might be correct.
Mm-hmm.
I know the Norwegians are doing very well, and Christian Blumenfeld's playing his hand right now. He's winning everything. It could also be just a dark horse that hasn't really won a World Cup, like a Yelly. Is it Yelly Jeans?
Yelly Jeans, yeah.
Yelly Jeans. I think someone like that could have a breakthrough, and everyone goes, "Oh, who's this guy?" There's someone Simon Whitfield won in 2000. I was like, "Who's this guy?" And he was always that guy that had been 4th, 5th, 6th, been there, and then had his breakthrough day because he didn't have the pressure.
Yeah.
But nor do I think this Olympics will have the same pressure as any other Olympics. There's going to be no crowds. There's going to be no opening. It's going to be. I think it's going to be a lot more reserved. So, okay, I've got to pick one. I'll pick Vincent Lewis and Nicola Spirig.
Stuff. And one bit of advice to an upcoming athlete that hopes to turn pro. What would your one main piece of advice be?
I think the number one thing is to have enough passion to endure the tough times.
Mm-hmm.
Aligning those passions with strengths, being really honest with yourself. Do I have the capability? And I'm not saying you need to show on paper that you're amazing, but just you're a reasonable swim, bike, and runner, and are you passionate? And then if you've got those two things, then just go all in and create the best team around you. Whether that be family or friends or whatever it is, and then just make it happen. I mean, like your podcast, it's in the name. It's endurance. You got to endure the tough times. But try and keep that passion alive is everything, even when you're injured or sick or not getting the performances you want. So yeah, it's kind of more than one, but the idea is to keep your passion on fire.
Yeah. Good stuff. Greg, thanks a million for coming on. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
It was a great episode, and I want to let you go. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Yeah. So thanks very much, Greg.
Thanks so much for having me, Emmett. Yeah, I'm off to grab my 1.5-year-old after his nap. So I better run and go get him. All right.
So, show's over. Thanks everybody for listening. I truly appreciate everyone that tunes in, listens, shares it, and I would appreciate any feedback, any reviews. Please don't forget to subscribe and be notified when new episodes come out. Thanks again to Greg for coming on the show, giving us his time. It was truly an honour to speak to someone who's had so much success in the sport of triathlon and given us so much advice back. So we thank Greg for that. We'll be back next week with another great episode next Wednesday. Stay tuned. Thanks.